Following the advice of my counsel not to respond to that question for the reasons of the objections that she raised.
Okay, and I understand that you're following the advice of your counsel. My question is simply, are you refusing to answer the question if you are aware of any errors of substance in your book published in 2020, Natalie Wood, The Complete Biography? That's a yes or no.
This relates back to Ms. Finstad's second book, Natalie Wood, where in dramatic fashion, she talks about going down to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department and meeting a detective by the name of Sweet Lou Danoff, and Sweet Lou giving her one or two boxes of the 1981 file on the investigation in Natalie Wood's death, whereupon he seated her in a room. She was accompanied by her mother, who was taking photographs of some of these things that they were able to see. One of the things that I tried to do and spent a lot of time and money on was attempting to locate autopsy photographs.
Yes, yes.
Now let me explain to you the significance of this. There are different ways to take photographs during an autopsy. In Natalie's case, an autopsy was performed on her because under California law, the coroner's office was required to perform an autopsy on Natalie Wood. I don't want anybody to think that Robert Wagner gave someone permission to do it and thereby showing that he's innocent. The coroner had an obligation to do it because it was an unexplained death and she drowned. The statute specifically says that they're supposed to perform autopsies on drownings. They perform an autopsy. I actually witnessed 3 autopsies. It, of course, is kind of eye-opening. I'm not going to describe all the things they do because I'm just not going to. But here's what happens. If the death is unexplained and if it's suspicious or unexplained and potentially suspicious, they take photographs. In 1981, there would have been color photographs. They have photographers on staff, on the scene and in the autopsy rooms. As they perform different functions, they know when something's significant, or the doctor directs them. You need to take a picture of this. Now, the person is on a stainless steel table. They photograph the front with close-up pictures of any scratches, bruises, abrasions, bullet holes, anything else that is on the body that is unexplained or that might be evidence of something in the future. They roll a person over. They take photographs the same way. Now, those of you that know anything about Natalie Wood's death know that Natalie Wood was found with over 30 bruises on her body. Most of them on the lower part of her body. She did have some significant bruises on the top of her right hand and under here, right under here, like if you've got a defensive wound and somebody's striking at you, they hit you right here. Well, she had a big bruise there, a bruise that stretched nearly half of her forearm. It was so big. Okay. She had other bruises on her ankles and on her knees and on her calves and, like I said, in front. And so they took pictures of all that. Now, a pathologist sees scratches, bruises, abrasions, and they're unexplained and the death is kind of questionable or suspicious. What they do sometimes is they take a scalpel and they actually cut off the skin in a bruise, for instance, or a contusion, or perhaps if there's a scratch, they actually take the entire skin tissue that includes the scratch and they send it to the lab there, and they take a microscope and they look at this skin tissue. Now, when they use the microscope to look at the skin tissue, they take photographs, which you can understand how valuable that would be. I know from looking at Natalie's autopsy, they had a photographer there, and I know that they found bruises, scrapes, and scratches, and I know that the man took pictures of them. I also know that they took skin tissue samples of some of the bruises, and so I know they looked at them under a microscope. The reason why I know it is there was a report of it. Now, there was something very suspicious about the report, which I won't go into. You read the book, you'll see what was suspicious about the report. But I know we had those kind of photographs. So when I first started this investigation, decided that I was going to make a request of the Los Angeles County Police Department for the 1981 file. Now, I knew they were going to turn me down. I knew they were going to say no. My basis for part of it was Finstad's first book, Natasha, where she said in the book some of what she was representing was contained in the 1981 file at the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. She didn't mention in the first book that she got 1 or 2 boxes. She didn't mention anything about Sweet Lou Danoff. She didn't mention anything about going down to the Sheriff's Department to look at them. None of that, none of the things that she talks about in Natalie Wood in 2020, 20 years later, did she mention in the first book. But she said enough in there where I knew that she got things from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Okay. And under California law, if they gave it to her, they have to give it to me.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So I asked them for it, and I told them why I was asking. And they blew me off, as you might say. And I sent a similar letter to the coroner's office. And of course, they told me to go jump in the lake. They didn't give me one piece of paper. I've always had to sue them or threaten to sue them. After a few months of going back and forth with them, I finally just decided, okay, I'm going to sue them. I went into court. I claimed to the judge that I should be entitled to the entire 1981 file because they showed the 1981 file to Suzanne Finstad. I was able to prove that she got certain things, which the judge ordered given to me. Okay. But when it came down to the entire file, which, by the way, does include autopsy photograph, because the judge said that the file contained autopsy photographs, he said, you can't have those because you didn't prove that she got the entire file. It was your burden to prove it. You didn't prove it, so you lose. There wasn't much I could do about that. I really think he was wrong in his ruling, but I appealed and I lost the appeal, of course. So I just decided to move on. Now, we fast forward to 2020. And in 2020, Finstad comes out with her book, Natalie Wood. She knew I'd been out there investigating. And I'm confident that she knew that I was getting ready to find a publisher for my book because of letters that I wrote. She was in constant communication with the sheriff's detectives, Detective Hernandez and Lieutenant Carina. Okay. So she knew what I was doing out there, and she knew about the lawsuit that I filed, the first one, and so forth. Of course, when her book comes out, the first thing I do is I get a copy of it because I want to see what she's going to say now about Natalie's death. In the book, she says she was given 1 or 2 boxes of the complete file created in 1981. Well, when I read that, I decided, all right, I'm going to make another request for the file again. I filed another lawsuit. Now, if anybody's interested in a lot of this stuff, it's on my website. If you go to my website and do the drop downs and find investigation, you're going to find a whole lot of documents and all sorts of things relating to all these lawsuits that I filed.
Okay.
All right. But in that lawsuit, same judge, and I say, Judge, guess what? She said in her book that she got 1 or 2 boxes. And we have this big fight. And this time we take Finstad's deposition, which is on my website, and we take Sweet Lou Danoff's deposition. Now, in her book, she represented that Danoff was a detective, which he wasn't. He never was a detective.
Okay.
So she explained that away, saying it was some kind of editorial mistake. All right. So
Okay.
we talked to Sweet Lou Danoff. Well, guess what Sweet Lou said? Sweet Lou said he never met the lady. He never
No way.
talked to her, and he never gave her one doggone thing.
No way.
That deposition is on my website.
Wow.
So if anybody has any question about what I'm saying, you can go listen to the deposition yourself and see what he has to say.
I would definitely will be doing that.
After we take Danoff's deposition and he says that, I began to try to corroborate, just like I would Dennis Davern, Finstad's statements, because this man is saying he never met her, and she's saying he let her see 1 or 2 boxes of record. So I began to try to get evidence to support her. I mean, I was trying to prove that what she was saying was truthful because I wanted the entire file so I could get the autopsy photographs. I only wanted to get those photographs so I could give them to my expert pathologist, so my expert pathologist could look at them and tell me what I believe, which I'll tell you about in a minute. I'm trying to prove that she's truthful because I want this file.
Yeah.
Well, she fights me the whole way. In her deposition, she refuses to answer numerous questions, claiming some kind of privilege.
Ms. Finstad, I will ask you again, are you aware of any errors of substance in your 2020 book that you published, Natalie Wood, The Complete Biography?
And I would interject the same objection and instruct the witness not to answer unless she elects to do so.
I'll follow the advice of counsel.
And so I'll ask it one more time. I understand the objection. I understand the instruction to the counsel's witness. I want to make clear that you're refusing to answer that question. Is that correct, Ms. Finstad?
I'm following the advice of my counsel.
And you're refusing to answer the question whether you're aware of any errors of substance in your book published in 2020 called Natalie Wood, The Complete Biography. Is that correct?
I'm following the advice of my counsel not to respond to that question for the reasons of the objections that she raised.
Okay, and I understand that you're following the advice of your counsel. My question is simply, are you refusing to answer the question if you are aware of any errors of substance in your book published in 2020, Natalie Wood, The Complete Biography? That's a yes or no.
I repeat the answer that I gave earlier, which is that I am following the advice of counsel.
Well, that's a non-responsive answer, and again, I'll certify that.
And just will not help me, but she confirms under oath. She says, I stand by what I wrote in my book. So after we do everything to try to show that she's telling the truth, then the judge issues a ruling. And let me just read to you here what the judge said in his ruling, just part of it. After he reiterates what Danoff said, that he never spoke to her, he never seen her before this lawsuit, and he didn't give her access to anything. He makes a comment about the fact that she said that he was a detective when he wasn't. And then she says she only vaguely remembers where in the outskirts of Los Angeles she was when Danoff provided her access to the murder book. In her book, Natalie Wood, she refers to this file as the, quote, murder book.
Yes, I remember
Let me tell you something. In 5 years worth of fighting and lawsuits with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, no one ever used those two words in describing the 1981 file.
Wow.
This, in my opinion, was pure sensationalism. That's all it was about. Well, we go back and he says this. She does not remember the address of the building, whether she used a freeway to get there, or any landmarks near the building, only that the area was commercial. By the time she wrote the book, she could not remember whether the murder book was in one or two boxes. She knows that post-mortem photographs of Wood exist because the photographer, Vidal Hera, told her he took them. And Vidal Hera is another story. The judge ruled this. This is what he said. But her view that she was given access to a murder book or other complete file, as opposed to select documents, is not supported. In this regard, the court does not find Finstad's testimony credible.
Wow.
This is what a Superior Court judge said about Suzanne Finstad, the author of Natalie Wood.
Wow. Wow.
Finstad's perception of what she received is undermined by her lack of knowledge of how the LASD operates and what records are included in an investigative file. Now listen to this. Finstad also had an interest in writing her book to aggrandize the access she received over and above that which a normal member of the public would receive. So basically what he's saying is she had a motive to exaggerate what it was she got and how she got it.
Yeah.
Now, let me tell you the significance of these autopsy photographs before I finish here. During the autopsy, as I've told you, they took tissue samples. It's not mentioned anywhere in the autopsy, but I found in talking with my pathologist, she actually saw it in a little bitty note on the diagrams, the anterior and posterior diagrams that are in an autopsy report. There's a little mark right on her throat right here, and the word scratch out to the side of it. Now, when they took these tissue samples, they didn't take a sample of this scratch. Now, the significance of that is this. These microscopes that they had two of them. One was called a TIM and one was called a SIM, and they performed various functions. But one of those microscopes had the ability to visualize a wound, for instance, at the power of 500,000. And what's significant about that is if there was a scratch on her throat right here, and they took the skin tissue and looked at it, they could have possibly determined whether or not it was a fingernail scratch, and perhaps even found tiny bits of material that would be contained under the fingernail of a person, maybe even enough to do DNA. And back in 1981, DNA was just getting started. But if they found anything in that wound, they might have been able to analyze it from a DNA standpoint and actually determine who made the scratch. All right. There was nothing around there that could have caused a scratch in the middle of Natalie's throat, except perhaps somebody grabbing her by the throat and their thumbnail making a scratch on her throat. I personally believe it's a thumbnail impression. They didn't take the tissue. They didn't look at the scratch, as far as I can tell, at all. And they didn't mention it. I'm confident that a photograph exists of it. And I would like that photograph because I would like to have it blown up. And perhaps with it blown up, a pathologist might be able to see something that would allow them to draw the conclusion that it was a fingernail scratch.
Yeah.
That's number one. Number two, they did take tissue samples of a bruise. Now, Dr. Noguchi, the coroner to the stars, was a self-proclaimed expert in bruises and skin tissue. One of the things that he has said is that bruises really tell a story in and of themselves, because a bruise changes color over time, as you know, and when you assess the color changes and you visualize them with these microscopes they have, you can almost pinpoint to the hour when that bruise occurred. Now keep in mind, once the person's dead, then the bruise isn't going to do anything. It's basically fixed in time, is what I'm saying. Well, they took all these skin tissue samples, and I know that those microscopes took pictures of those bruises and the skin tissue. And if I had them and I could show them to my pathologist might be able to say not only how old the bruises were, but how deep they were, meaning what kind of force it took to make them. So that's why I wanted these photographs, because I knew they would tell a story. This is a circumstantial evidence case. The circumstances of the forensic paint a picture. There is enough in the autopsy report for me to be able to say that a bruise was a contusion and not just a bruise. And of course, a contusion takes force. If it takes force, then that means it could have come from somebody striking her or kicking her, something of that nature. It also could have come from her banging it on something. Like, for instance, there was a contusion on her ankle. I believe, as I've said before, that she was pushed towards the swim set door that was always open. Why they kept it open all the time, I don't know. But Davern said this, it was always open. So if she was pushed towards the swim set door, which is the only way you could get on the boat except for jumping over the side, she could have hit her ankle on the door, the side of the boat, something of that nature. If she did that, it would have been hard enough where it would have caused a contusion as opposed to a bruise. But Natalie had scratches, abrasions, bruises, and contusions on her body. And the pathologist didn't do anything to try to explain where they came from, how they got there, and who might have put them there.
Incredible.
Which is very sad. I don't believe it was incompetence for 1 minute. The things that they didn't do, like taking fingernail clippings and scrapings, you always do that. Always. There were a lot of things that weren't done that is just done in the normal course of performing an autopsy.
Well, particularly in this case, when so much attention was paid to, or you hear so often about the scratches on the side of the dinghy, being that they theorized that she had scratched the side of the dinghy, it just seems so obvious that they would have wanted to check her fingernails or do the fingernail scrapings. So that just seems like such an oversight that it doesn't seem possible to me it was an actual oversight.
A consultant that Noguchi used by the name of Paul Miller, he said in his report, which by the way is in my book, he saw what he believed to be scratches on the side of the dinghy when he inspected the dinghy. And he inspected the dinghy within hours after they found Natalie's death. If they would have taken fingernail clippings and looked under her fingernails, they might have found portions. If she scratched the dinghy hard enough for somebody to be able to see it and look at it, there would be something under her fingernails. That would be significant because it would show that she was alive next to the dinghy. She was trying to get over the side of the dinghy, of course, and that she was in the water when Marilyn Wayne and John Payne heard a woman screaming for help. It all ties in to all the other circumstantial evidence, but they didn't get fingernail clippings or scrapings. I'll tell you a story. I took Dr. Noguchi's deposition in my first case. I was limited on what I could ask him because it was a deposition in a Public Records Act case, not a deposition about Natalie Wood's death. But when his lawyer wasn't paying attention, I asked him if he got fingernail clippings or fingernail scrapings. And when I asked him that question, he literally shot back in his seat like this.
Wow.
He actually did that. I wished I would have had it on video.
Me too.
But I didn't video his deposition. It was a dramatic reaction to
I'll
that.
bet, yeah.
And he said no. So it was done intentionally. And he remembered that he didn't do it intentionally almost 40 years later.
Well, I'll tell you, I can't wait till we do our installment on Dr. Noguchi because that is going to be a doozy. I think people are going to be really interested to hear about his backstory. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's a lot people don't know about his backstory.
We got lots of things to talk about on Dr. Noguchi.
So I had a couple questions for you going back to the Sweet Lou, was it Danoff?
Sweet Lou Danoff.
Sweet Lou Danoff. So one question that I had is, do you think that there is any possibility that he was misrepresenting what had happened in court to keep himself from getting in trouble or, something like that?
Well, first of all, he's retired.
Okay.
So he really has nothing to lose by telling the truth.
First off, do you know Miss Finstad?
No, I don't know her.
All right, bear with me as I ask these questions then. Do you recall ever speaking to Miss Finstad?
No,
Do you recall ever communicating with Miss Finstad in writing?
no,
Did you ever provide any kind of document or documents to Miss Finstad?
no.
I'll tell you this, he talked to me very freely.
Okay.
And in those emails, he said he never met Suzanne Finstad. And when we took his deposition, I did videotape it, and as well as Finstad's, because I wanted to post it. I wanted people to see it. I frankly believed him.
Okay.
He was very believable. Let's say she was telling the truth. Perhaps she got mixed up. Maybe it wasn't Sweet Lou Danoff. Maybe somebody just said that name and she liked it. The man was adamant that he had never met the lady and never given her anything. And he also disputed, like she said, that he took her to a room and sat her down in the room and that the room had a couple tables in it or what. He said that he was in charge of the archives. He said he didn't even have such a room. He didn't have places for people to look at. If they wanted to look at a file, they had to sit on the floor.
Wow.
So, there were other things in there that he disputed. She was talking and got a lot of information out of Detective Rasher, who by the way was a very, what words did she use in her first book? Well, they were very favorable terms. But then in her updated version, she said she was stricken by his incompetence. 20 years later, she becomes stricken with his incompetence.
That's interesting.
But he could have mentioned some names. She might have asked him, well, who's in charge of the archives? And he said, well, Sweet Lou's in charge of the archives. She could have gotten it from a lot of people, a lot of different sources.
I hope people are finding this as fun and as interesting and as compelling as I am, because I'm very much enjoying this.
Well, as long as people are interested in it, I'll keep doing interviews.
Absolutely.
Is that a deal?
It's a deal.
As I mentioned, Mr. Danoff, Ms. Finstad has identified you as the person who provided to her access to Miss Wood's murder book. First off, do you know Miss Finstad?
No, I don't know her. I have, the name doesn't mean anything to me.